I'm so excited to make my own Iceberg series. And for those of you who don't know how this works, the more well-known information is up top, above the water, and the more obscure, deep information is below water. Thanks to this person on Reddit for making this Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg. And now, let's dive in. Of course, what Unsolved Mystery chart would be complete without a classic like Bigfoot? And there's a bit more to this than you may expect. You see, Bigfoot, from what we all know, is a hairy, grisly primate in the Pacific Northwest. The most well-known shred of evidence for Bigfoot's existence is what's known as the Patterson-Gimlin film shot in the 60s. It was taken by a group of men in the Pacific Northwest, and on the film you can see what appears to be a large, hairy hominid out in the distance, walking back to the woods. This footage is seen by some as striking proof that Bigfoot must exist, but over the years people have come forward, such as special effects artists and makeup people, and recreated the suit, and they've been able to reenact the movements shown on film pretty closely, demonstrating that it was probably a fake. Now is an important time to point out that there are similar legends in the Native American folklore, such as the skunk ape and also the Yeti in Siberia. Other indigenous tribes in North America have had stories about similar creatures. For one, there's a petroglyph that was found in an area occupied by the Yokot people, showing a group of Bigfoot called the Family. Also, a Protestant missionary told stories of giants living among the natives near what is now Spokane. I think my favorite pop culture reference to Bigfoot has to be an offshoot comic book from Star Wars that shows Chewie and Han getting lost in hyperspace and they crash land on Earth. Han tragically dies and Chewbacca's left to roam the woods of the Pacific Northwest all by himself. The Bloop. In 1997, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, picked up an ultra-low frequency sound in the ocean. Some thought that maybe this sound came from an animal, but it was picked up by sensors even 3,000 miles away. In order for this to be the case, whatever this creature was had to have been larger than any known whale or other aquatic animal. Webdriver Torso. This one kind of gets to me because I hate weird sounds, like emergency alert sirens and songs played backwards. But the Webdriver Torso was a channel that was uploading thousands upon thousands of short clips of red and blue squares moving around the screen and these weird sounds playing with it. A lot of videos would pop up online speculating that maybe this Webdriver Torso channel was a modern-day numbers station. Numbers stations were radio stations used during the Cold War that would read off numbers and words to spies to give them coded messages as to what they should do next. YouTube eventually caught wind of the conspiracies and the speculation, and came out and denied it. They said it was a quality control measure to monitor how videos were uploading in terms of their video quality and audio quality. But there's people out there to this day that think that there's more to this Webdriver Torso story. Perhaps the Webdriver Torso and other strange uploads like it are secret messages from the CIA, MI6, or some other intelligence agency waiting for their operatives to strike in a foreign land. Harold Holt. Harold Holt was an Australian Prime Minister in the Liberal Party, and in 1967, during his term, he went swimming in some rough conditions during a storm, and despite being a well-known, lifelong avid swimmer, he disappeared without a trace. Some people thought that this was a suicide attempt, and others thought that maybe he got help from the CIA to fake his own death, and others thought that maybe he somehow snuck onto a Chinese submarine to defect from Australia. Which... how? Whatever happened. Ironically enough, he was commemorated with the Harold Holt Memorial Swim Center, which, when you think of it, is almost as bad as opening a hardware store and naming it Jesus Christ's 2x4 and Nail Shop. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. This was a plane that went missing on its way to Beijing, and it went missing about 200 nautical miles northwest of a Malaysian island. Eventually, it would become one of the most expensive aviation searches in history. Originally, the most likely hypothesis for what happened to this aircraft was that it was hijacked, because of the fact that within the radius of the amount of fuel they had, there were about 600 different runways that the plane could land at. Eventually, this theory would be scrapped because a few years later they had discovered that another satellite had picked up one more ping in the Indian Ocean. And along the beaches in the Indian Ocean, there was debris of an aircraft that was discovered, and they had eventually pinpointed it to the Flight 370. It's still unknown what caused this plane to crash, but the most likely explanation now among experts is hypoxia. Hypoxia can happen when an aircraft rapidly loses pressure. It's thought that Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 might have rapidly depressurized, causing all the passengers and crew to run out of oxygen and pass out, leading eventually to the crash in the Indian Ocean. But to this day, it remains one of those unsolved mysteries that we may never be able to answer. Babushka Lady. This is one in a long line of strange theories and questions from the JFK assassination. There's this woman that can be seen in different footage from that day, including the Zebra film, called the Babushka Lady, and she's named that way because she has something wrapped around her head, sort of resembling a Russian grandmother. This Babushka Lady was never identified, even when the House Select Committee on Assassinations was opened, and the Warren Commission, which isn't too incredible for way back then, but even still, years and years later, the fact that we don't know who she was is kind of baffling. But whoever she was, they wanted her to come forward because it was thought, and is still thought, that she might have recorded from a key angle that day, and would be able to shed light on what happened on November 22nd, 1963. D.B. Cooper. D.B. Cooper was an American hijacker in the 70s and is pretty well known for just how mysterious of a man that he was. Cooper boarded a flight, sat down, and gave a note to a nearby stewardess, which she thought he was writing a number on and hitting on her, so she ignored it. But he leaned over, telling her to read it. She did, and it said she had a bomb. In order to make his point very clear, he pulled out his bag, opened it, and showed her what appeared to be red sticks of dynamite. The stewardess was then ordered to sit next to him, and she said that he had a very friendly demeanor, and even seemed to maybe be from the West Coast, because as they were flying past parts of Washington, he would say, "Oh, that naval base is like 20 minutes away from whatever city." His demand was that he get a parachute and $200,000 in $20 bills. It was theorized that perhaps he asked for 2 parachutes because he was worried the FBI would tamper with them and make him crash, and that if he asked for 2, that would be implying that he would take a hostage and make them jump as well, so the FBI would be less likely to tamper with them. Smart move. The crew requested that when the FBI were to meet them on the tarmac, that the passengers would be allowed to disembark. Cooper agreed, and after landing and unloading the passengers and receiving his parachutes and money, the plane took off with Cooper and the 5 flight crew. Somewhere over the Washington and Oregon border, Cooper made his jump, and nobody has seen him since. Up next, we have Taos Hum, or The Hum, and it's kind of similar to the Bloop in that it relates to a noise, but this one's definitely far more nefarious. Since 1973, there have been reports of people hearing an intense low-frequency rumbling all over the world, including Australia, the US, UK, and Canada. A small minority, about 2%, in each area could hear this noise. It seems to have a range of about 30 miles, and middle-aged people are the ones most likely to report hearing it. We still don't know what caused the hum, but there's a few different theories floating out there. One of these explanations is mining or manufacturing, because a lot of these reports come from people within mining towns or in the vicinity of a factory. And even in one case, the hum was pinpointed back to the pump on a cargo ship. The other really popular theory to explain what's going on here is tinnitus, but people who claim to hear the hum say that the sound is worse indoors than outdoors, when if it were tinnitus, it should be consistent regardless of wherever you are. So this leads some people to believe that the hum and the source of it are a top secret sonic weapon that's being tested on unwilling subjects. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer active in the 1960s in the San Francisco Bay Area. It's been confirmed that he's responsible for the death of 5 people, but it's possible this body count totals around 37. It's just, without knowing his identity and any other activities he may have been involved in, we can't really pinpoint how many he's responsible for. This Zodiac Killer was mostly known for his cryptic messages sent to newspapers to taunt police. They knew that these letters had come from the killer himself, because these letters had contained information not released to the public. 2 or 3 of these letters, or ciphers as they've come to be known, have been cracked, and it's thought that once all of them are solved, his identity will be found out. While looking into the Zodiac Killer, I came across some interesting theories as to who the culprit might be, and those included Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Charles Manson. If we're going to entertain these more out there theories, I would think it's more likely that Charles Manson did it, only for the fact that Charles Manson was more willing to be more personal with his victims. Ted Kaczynski mailed bombs, and bombs are more of a remote device, whereas stabbing would be probably way too personal for him. Elisa Lam. This is one of the more disturbing topics on this level of the iceberg. Elisa Lam was a Canadian woman who stayed at the iconic Cecil Hotel in California, where others, such as the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, used to stay. She was in frequent contact with her parents on her travels, but when they didn't hear from her for a few days, they contacted the LAPD to report their concerns. They even flew down and helped look for her. Police searched her hotel room for clues, and used canine units to search the rest of the hotel. However, around the time of the search, other guests started to complain about the low water pressure, off taste, and even blackened water coming out of their faucets. Following this report, a hotel janitor opened a rooftop tank, finding Lamb's body floating face up. The maintenance hatch was too small, so they cut a hole in the side to get her body out. In the reports, police determined it was an accidental drowning, and pointed to her bipolar disorder as a possible additional factor. She was prescribed medicine for bipolar disorder, but the autopsy indicated she had likely stopped or lowered her dosage herself. There were some holes in the official investigation. Most glaring is that in order to reach the water tanks, she would have had to bypass the roof's alarm system that gets triggered if you try to force open the locked door. The water tanks are also propped up on concrete and didn't have permanent access. Workers would have to carry a ladder to get to them. So, how did Elisa get up there? What's become most viral of all in this case is that there is security footage from around the time of her disappearance, showing her walking into an elevator, creeping around hallways, as if she were trying to hide from something, or someone. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript is a codex, or manuscript, dating back to the 15th century with strange illustrations inside. Now, we still don't know whether this was intended as a fictional work or to be a factual reference work about various plants, but the strange thing is that we still haven't been able to identify what these plants are or even what it says. American codebreakers from World War I and World War II have tried and failed to determine meaning from this manuscript. What we do know for sure about this book is that the manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, who was the book dealer that bought the book in 1912. The illustrations have baffled historians, as most plant drawings can't be identified. The first owner of the book that we know of was a 17th century alchemist, who had the book in his collection for years, but never opened it and found it strange he even had it on his shelves, remarking he didn't know where it came from. To this day, we still don't know who wrote the book. Leading theories include a bohemian pharmacist and polymath Roger Bacon. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was a London serial killer in the late 1800s. He targeted mostly ladies of the night who worked in the slums of London. His name came from a letter supposedly sent by the killer to various newspapers around London. One of them came with a preserved human kidney. He would finish off his victims by slitting their throats before dissecting their internal organs. During their investigation, the police interviewed hundreds of people that worked at slaughterhouses and butcheries across these slums in London, and all of them had alibis and didn't seem to be the culprits. However, it's thought maybe the perpetrator was a doctor who thought he could go to the poor area of London and get away with murders for dissection. At this time, it was more difficult for medical students and professionals to get bodies to study because there were heavy restrictions on how these bodies could be accessed. A lot of grave robbing was taking place during that time, and it seems possible that an eager doctor might get a little too eager and take matters into his own hands. I think the most interesting theory about this is that perhaps the perpetrator was one of Queen Victoria's sons himself. Prince Albert is thought to have possibly visited this slum, gotten somebody pregnant, and killed her to cover it up. But when you think about the fact that this happened to at least 5 or 6 different women over the course of a few months, it just doesn't seem to make sense that he'd be able to get away with 6, 7 murders all in such a short span of time, only because he was such a high prolific person. A lot of eyes would have been on him.